The topic, like you see on the screen, is how to avoid becoming a target for vendor fraud from Corpay. To get underway is our CEO, Doug Austin. Doug, take it away.
Well, welcome everybody. We're glad you're here today. Thank you for joining us. We began this innovative supplier webinar session a couple of years ago. And what we do from time to time is bring who we think are both innovative and competitive suppliers on to talk about current issues or opportunities to address problems in expense categories or audit and recovery categories or even new revenue opportunities. And have those suppliers speak directly to you folks and see if we can help reduce problems, reduce costs, and improve profitability. So we're really pleased today to have Corpay and Kai present to you on a topic that seems to be more and more pressing and urgent, and that is preventing vendor fraud. So with that, I will turn it over to Kai, and we'll talk to you again at the end. Thank you very much.
Hi, Doug. Thank you so much for inviting me today. And I'm really excited to talk to you about something that I am very passionate about, and that is vendor payment fraud. It's quite prevalent these days, and I'll explain more of that as we go through the webinar. But thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. And I'm excited to get started with this. So Doug, before we get started, let's talk about what we're going to learn today. First of all, who's targeted for vendor fraud? What does that look like when they're targeting you? And I'll use the term fraudsters throughout the session. So what do those fraudsters look for? How are they targeting dealerships? How to recognize vendor fraud? What does it look like? Sometimes we believe that it looks like this big $100,000, they're trying to scam us out of all this money, when in reality, you're going to see the figures and you'll be shocked at how much that fraud dollar amount it really is, what the average is. And then what is the total cost of fraud? It's not just the dollar amount, but what are all the costs that are associated with those fraud payments? And then how can you safeguard yourself? What are some controls that you can put into place to protect yourself from payment fraud? So Doug and David, before we get into everything, the nuts and bolts, let's do a quick poll and let's find out how often some of our attendees here have experienced vendor payment fraud. So if you could go ahead and select, have you been in like the nightmare of vendor payment fraud where somebody has stolen a batch of checks out of your mailbox and you're dealing with that every day where these fictitious check payments are coming through? Is it a once a week occurrence? Has it been monthly? Is it just one time, or have you never, thankfully, been affected by vendor payment fraud? So interesting results here. That looks like the majority has had at least one time. Half of you have had at least once where you have experienced some type of vendor payment fraud. And that's really, really good because it's quite a problem. We'll get into more detail with that right now. So let's go ahead and share the results of that so everybody can see. And then I'm going to go ahead and can I turn off my camera? Okay, so as Doug mentioned at the beginning, I'm Kai Rousey, Senior Director of Sales at Corpay. And Corpay is a subsidiary of FleetCor. And FleetCor actually was started with a focus in the fleet industry with a fuel card. Back in 1986, our headquarters for FleetCor is in Atlanta, Georgia, and now it's a global business. And they look towards simplifying the way businesses manage and pay their expenses. And as you can see, we are the #1 business-to-business commercial MasterCard issuer in North America. We have vendor networks across all clientele. So even though today we're focusing on automotive, but we are in all different businesses, travel and entertainment, hotel management, medical, construction. So it's really an all-encompassing. And over the years, since 1986, FleetCor has decided to expand its solutions and acquire best-in-class businesses that really focus on expense payments to aid businesses in eliminating those manual processes that you're using today, help you control spend, and reduce fraud. And that's where they came up with Corpay, by a combination of these different best-in-class businesses like Comdata, Invoice Pay, Accrualify, and Cambridge, bringing it all under that one umbrella that is a one-stop shop for AP workflows. And it really gives businesses a smarter way to pay. Now, I want you to imagine this scenario. So for my controllers, my office managers, my AP managers and directors, you're sitting at your desk and you get a call from your GM or your GSM that says, hey, we've got an emergency on our hands. We need to get this payment wired out today, or we can't pick up this car for my customer from this other dealership. Can you take down this information? He then gives you all the information for the other dealership and an account number to wire the funds to, and then says, okay, how soon can you get this wire sent out? Now, even though this scenario might be a little out of the ordinary, you don't really wire transfer money for dealer trades or used car purchases, but you do recognize his voice and his speech pattern. And he seems truly upset that they've got to go get this car, and you agree to make the payment as soon as possible because you're trying to help the business. I hate to tell you, you've just been scammed. There is some artificial intelligence out there, AI, that uses natural language processing to create human-like conversation dialogue called ChatGPT that is being used to fool people. Now, most of you have probably heard of the terrifying phone call that a mother got saying it was from her daughter, saying that her daughter had been kidnapped and was being held for ransom. The call was a scam. As we all know, it was on the news, but the mom was 100% certain that that was her daughter's voice that she heard. It was completely her voice, her inflection. It was actually the way she would have cried. And they, were demanding money. So if a mom could not tell the difference between an AI generated voice and her own daughter's voice, what are the chances that someone in our dealership wouldn't be able to distinguish a faked voice from a colleague or someone that she's even worked with for a long time? So while that AP example of that check needing wired for a car is hypothetical, that kidnapping one is very true. I'm sure you've heard of that. So how long will it take before these fraudsters find a way to use this chat technology and other AI tools to try to steal money from your dealership? So now that you think about that, now I want you to think about your AP team and the dynamic of your AP team. Whether it's one person or it's multiple people, they are handling multiple card programs. There's fuel programs. Some of you dealers have multiple dealerships and they all have separate fuel programs that they're doing. Some of you might even have a gas pump at the dealership. You're also using different travel and entertainment point of sale purchase cards. You're also doing payments online via ACH by having to log into multiple websites, hand key in the banking information, and then you're also printing on average anywhere in a single point dealership 125 to 150 vendor payment checks per month. So you've got this AP staff that has invoices coming in from the parts department, from the sales department. They've got credit card statements coming in from all over. They've got emails coming in from the utility companies because they're set up on ACH and EFT transactions. So every one of those processes that comes also with an increase for a chance of payment fraud. Every single time you enter your credit card information on a website, you're opening yourself up for a chance for that card to become compromised. And then we know the hassle it is that once a card becomes compromised, how then we have to go back, reissue cards to everyone in the dealership and reissue it on all the websites. So that takes time to do that. Now, when you also think about the reconciliation on the right-hand side of my screen over here, is you're reconciling all of those different payments, because now I've got this fuel card statement, I've got this purchasing card statement coming in, I've got these ACH purchases that we've made that hit my bank account that someone has to reconcile, and then finally I have all these 150 checks that we've sent out to all these vendors. Now, that adds another layer to an already tedious and overwhelming process to your AP and office staff. Now, typically you have to wait until you receive the statement from the credit card company or your bank statement to see the charges for the payments that have cleared. Well, by then it's too late for any fictitious payments that might have happened, and then you have to fight to get your money back from the card company or from the bank. All of this is costing you time and money. Now imagine you've got this AP staff, you've got this office manager controller that's overseeing all these payment options, and they get that phone call from that GSM that says, hey, we need to wire money right away. So why wouldn't they, or why couldn't they inadvertently wire money for a car to a fictitious dealership when they're dealing with all of this? Now, I know that AP example with the wire transfer is hypothetical, but these processes that we just talked about, your internal payment processes, are very real. And how long do you think it will be before fraudsters actually find ways to use this chat technology that I talked about and other AI tools to try to steal money from companies? One of the best things I would say that came out of the pandemic, it really accelerated the digital age in finance. Remote workers had to get the payments out and discovered electronic ways of doing it. And as more payments go digital, it is imperative that you add more controls and security measures, because I can guarantee you with 100% certainty that you are not Mr. Dealer, Mr. GM, or CFOs. You are not signing 100% of the checks and the payments that you think you are and the control that you think you're having because you're signing those 150 vendor checks. You have payments that are set up on ACH or EFT payments. You have payments that are on auto pay on your credit card that someone is reconciling. So unless you are reconciling those, Mrs. Dealer, Miss GM, whoever you are in the dealership, you're reconciling that. You don't know all of the expenditures that you are actually paying for that are not requiring your signature. And that is one of the things that the pandemic did, was it forced people towards the digital age, but they really need to focus on putting some more security measures in place if you're going to go digital. Okay, now it's fun time. Can anyone tell me, or does anybody know what TCOF stands for? So let's go ahead and select, what do you think TCOF stands for? Okay, we've got some people say taking care of fraud. Some are saying total cost of fraud. Okay, trade cap of fraud, total cap on fraud, all good answers, all good answers. So the correct answer is total cost of fraud, the top one here. So what is the total cost of fraud? What does that incorporate? So let's talk about, first of all, that those 125 to 150 checks that you're sending out. They are still the most common method of payment for business-to-business payments out there, even more than ACH. So even though the pandemic forced us towards digital payments, there are still those businesses that are like, nope, I still want a check, or no, I'm still going to send a check. So checks, the bottom line, they're expensive. Studies have shown that it costs anywhere from $3 to $10 to process a business-to-business check. Now, those prices go up depending on where you are in the country, what your labor costs are, and who knows when stamps are going to go up again. ACH is somewhat less expensive, but there's still a cost involved, and it can still be intercepted. Where a virtual card payment, and we'll get into more of the details of what that is fast, simple, and it generally earns you money back. So there is no cost. And in fact, you can earn some money if you pay with a virtual card. So when we talk about the total cost of fraud, so when we're looking at those checks, so fraud losses include funds stolen out of the account. And that's when I mentioned you have checks being stolen right out of the mailbox. When someone steals that check, they're getting all of your bank account information. So now they're able to duplicate those checks and steal funds out of your account. Stolen goods and services and chargeback costs, reissuing payments. If the check is intercepted and you go to do another check, you have to stop payment. And so now we're looking at $30 to $50 for stop payment fees. Headcount. Remember that screen with your AP staff and all the different things that they're dealing with, and now add on the fact that they have to detect and try to figure out, is this a legit payment? Is this a good vendor? Now you might have to increase your headcount in trying to mitigate the chances of fraud. And then don't forget the damage that that does to your vendor relationship that you have if they're continually having to wait on payments because their payments are getting intercepted by fraudsters. They might say to you, listen, it's too expensive for us to do business with you. You're going to have to find another vendor to fulfill that service for you. Okay, so that's what the total cost of fraud means. I was really excited to see that there were several of you who have never experienced fraud, and that's great. But I hate to tell you, it's not a matter of if it's going to happen to you. It really is a matter of when it's going to happen. Fraudsters, quite frankly, they're after checks. So if they want to, they're going to phish, and I'll get into more detail about phishing, what it is, and how they're using that to get information to steal money. The FBI, it is going up by not just a few $100,000 every year. It doubled from 2021 to 2022. So it went from $1.3 billion in fraud losses in 2021 to $2.7 billion in 2022. And most organizations really want to have increased control over their payment workflows, but they're overwhelmed and they don't know how to do it. So that's why we're here today to talk. And as I mentioned, payment fraud isn't going anywhere. In fact, fraudsters are getting better at it, as you can see by the stats here. The number one way of experiencing fraud is by imposters. So again, I'll get into more of this in just a little bit, but really I like to share these stats because it shows that they're not really after tens of thousands of dollars in a single fraudulent action, because the median cost, as you can see, surprisingly is $1,400. That fits the small to mid-sized business model perfectly, which is where most of our dealerships fall. So we want to try to think that they're going to get us for that large amount, like I said, that we're buying that car from another dealer and I need you to wire, $74,882.95. It's not that. It's going to be, they're going to hit you for a much smaller scale. I mean, why not? Think about it. If I'm able to get $1,400 from you and another $1,400 from the dealership down the road, I'm making quite a nice living whitewashing checks. So when we look at this, we want to know, okay, who are these fraudsters? And we like to really picture some evil person sitting in a dark room with all these computer monitors around, fake IDs in the corner, like something out of a movie, right? Well, there's actually two types of fraudsters. There's an authorized fraudster, authorized party, or an unauthorized party. And according to the Federal Reserve Fraud Division, there are two types of fraudsters broken down into the authorized parties. They either act in a fraudulent manner, and that's someone that you know, or they are manipulated into acting in a fraudulent manner. So we're going to get into more detail in who are the fraudsters. So when we talk about an authorized party, that is going to be someone in the dealership. More times than not, it's someone that you trust acting in a fraudulent manner. So, internal perpetrators of fraud. Invoice fraud is probably the easiest type. You have an employee that creates a fictitious invoice, they post it for payment, and they send the check to a post office box that's related to them in some way. Now remember, we're looking at a few $100s. They're not putting something in for $10,000. They're putting in for a few $100s. The second kind of the three is wage fraud. And that's where an employee creates a ghost employee. Now, my history and my background in automotive is I've been a granddaughter of a car dealer, a daughter of a dealer. I've been in the automotive business my entire life. We are not typically seeing wage fraud when you create a ghost employee on a company's payroll, but what we do see with wage fraud is padding hours. I'm going to pad this technician's hours because when I hired him as the service manager, service director, I really need technicians. I guaranteed that he would turn 50 hours. He only turned 40. Now I got to pad 10 hours. So I'm going to call it shop time. Now, he very well could do shop time. He could be sweeping floors, emptying trash, cleaning up oil spills, whatever. But chances are the dealer, the GM, the CFO, you don't know that, right? You trust that that technician was doing what the shop foreman or whoever said, but in reality, they're just padding their time. So that's usually what we see in the dealership world as far as wage fraud. And then the third one would be expense fraud. And this is what we hear about. And I actually experienced this at the dealership. We had runners that would drive back and forth to the auction. We would pay for their lunch when they were on the road for up to $10. We were like, okay, swing by McDonald's, get yourself a cheeseburger or something like that, $10. You know, it was interesting. They could never find the receipt for the actual amount, but man, they always told me, oh yeah, it was right around $10, right at, it was right close to $10. So that was where we experienced some expense fraud too in the dealership. And that's a very real example. But I'm sure all of you can come up with examples that you've either heard in your 20 group meetings or that you've experienced about those common types of internal fraud. What actually causes those types of internal fraud? So I hate to tell you this, but automating your payments really does not ensure that fraud won't happen, because it does. And the root cause of fraud is the reason why it's going to happen. The first and the most important is there's no segregation of duties. There is one person in the dealership that has too much control over the company's funds. They are the person that can sign checks, They can write checks. They reconcile the bank account. There's no segregation of duties. That's the number one reason that we see with fraud. There's no checks and balances, no oversight, and nobody is auditing their work. So when you start thinking about this, think about those roles in your dealership where you're like, you know what? Yeah, the same person that's cutting checks is also the same person that's reconciling the bank account. Now, even though, and I have a lot of dealers do this because they go through the NADA Academy, and the NADA Academy tells them you need to sign every check, you need to open the bank statement. But as we're moving towards the electronic age more and more in the dealership world, as far as payments go, you're not getting those checks. You know, banks are like, well, we're going to charge you if you want all your canceled checks. So you think, okay, well, I don't really need my canceled checks because I'm signing all my checks. Yeah, that's not the case. You're not signing every single check. You like to think that you are. And even if you're going through the bank statement, you're looking at the checks, they can still go through without you finding them because there's no segregation of duties. Paper checks, they're tempting, they're low-hanging fruit, they are easily stolen, easily altered. When I talk about whitewashing a check, that means the check number didn't change, the dollar amount didn't change, but who we paid it to did. So fraudsters are stealing checks out of mailboxes. They're whitewashing them. They're very creative. They have the chemicals that can do it. And then they type in their name, business name, whatever, you know, they deposit that check and it goes through. Because with positive pay, you don't necessarily look at who the check was written to. You're just verifying that, yes, we wrote that check on that date for that dollar amount. I'll get into more about positive pay and what that looks like in the future for you. And then finally, this lack of VMF control. So does anybody know what VMF is? That's your vendor master file. So vendor master file is open to whoever wants to add a new vendor in your dealer management system can absolutely do it. So I've got parts people adding vendors. Hey, we're going to start buying parts from this new parts distributor. Hey, we're going to start having a new window tint guy come in and they're going to, you know, I got a new vendor there. Oh, I've got a new printing business. And the same person is responsible for making the payments that is also adding bogus payees to that vendor master file. If you don't take anything else away from my session today, please absolutely lock down who can add a vendor to your system. Every one of the dealer management system providers out there has the ability to lock that down. I highly recommend that you funnel that through one person, and please do not make it the same person who is making payments to those vendors. So make that someone totally neutral, has no skin in that game, but please, if there's nothing else you take from this session, lock that down. Now, what's really interesting, even though we have all of these statistics, 75% of people that have been surveyed still don't plan on stop using checks. So I'm not sure what all we need to do, but I do know that the number one reason that they don't want to stop using checks is because they don't understand how to move and how to get away. And what does that mean if we stop using checks? How can I still have control? And what do I need to do to put a system in place? It really is overwhelming to think about and change a system that has been working for the past 40 years. I know it seems crazy, but the accounts payable payment process in automotive has not changed in over 40 years with manual check payments. Now, I want you to think about that for a minute. You've changed how you log leads that come into the showroom, how they come in through the internet. You know, 40 years ago, we didn't have the internet. 40 years ago, we had a handwritten log by the front door in the showroom where we jotted people's names down, or, you know, guy in the green shirt came to talk to me about the Chevy in the front line of the lot. So look at how far we've come in every area. The service department now, you can take an iPad or a tablet out to the vehicle and completely write a vehicle up for service out in the lane or out on the lot. The customer doesn't even have to come into the dealership, but we're still writing those manual checks to pay your vendors. Now, I also want to talk about Toyota and Google and Facebook that have been victims of vendor payment fraud. Both of these cases of fraud, when they caught them, were internal. Those were trusted people that had set up fictitious vendors in their system that they had paid millions of dollars to that nobody caught. All right. The second type of authorized party fraud is being manipulated. So we have an employee who is inadvertently misguided to create fraud. So that first example that I gave with the general manager or the GSM calling saying, hey, I need a check wired, I need funds wired. That's an example of fraud where if I'm the AP person or the office manager and I inadvertently did it because I'm overwhelmed with all this other stuff that's going on, I didn't intentionally do it. I just did it because I thought that was the right person. We have another poll that we are going to put up. So, making an illegitimate request for payment or confidential information via email that comes from a trusted source. So this isn't a phone call, but this is an email. What is that called? So we're going to go ahead and open it up. Go ahead and select what you think that is called. Okay, very good. So we're going to end the poll. It looks like most of you think it's email fraud attempt. Well, actually, it's called business email compromise. Now, one thing that I do want to mention is this man in email, MIA. You may hear it sometimes called that, but the official name is called BEC, or business email compromise. So when we talk about what is the root cause of that external fraud, where someone is trying to coerce one of your trusted employees to do something in a fraudulent manner, we have three root causes of that type of fraud. The first is vendor fraud, where a vendor short ships you. Hey, we were supposed to get 10 widgets. We got 9 widgets. They billed you for 10. Really, that's self-explanatory. If you are not using purchase orders, please use purchase orders. I've done a couple of articles in Automotive News talking about the importance of purchase orders in every area of the business. So yes, Mr. Dealer, Miss Dealer, I'm talking to you. Every expenditure needs to have a purchase order that says, yes, I have approved this payment or this expenditure. Go ahead and pay it when it comes in. By the time you're signing the check, most of the time it's too late. So when you're using purchase orders for vendor fraud, that's going to help with that because you're actually counting, did we get the 10 widgets? Yes, we got the 10 widgets that we ordered. So we can go ahead. The other thing is balance billing. So invoices or vendors that bill the balance on account, they allow the vendor to overcharge or fail to credit or return shipment. So you really need to stay on top of, hey, we never did get that credit. We sent those parts back. We need to stay on top of that, where they're just doing balance forward instead of the open item that they should be doing. But when we talk about the business email compromise, man, you really need to train your employees on how to identify and how to respond to a BEC attack. So that helps minimize the phishing attempt. Remember I said earlier, I talked about phishing. So what they're doing is criminals send an email that appears to come from a known trusted source, but is making a request for payment or confidential information. They're asking for something. So you really need to implement policies for these actions that require independent verification from a second employee to decrease that attack. So what does that mean? Simply put, pick up the phone and call the vendor. If it's a vendor that emails and says, hey, Kai, I want you to know we changed our address. Send our checks to our new PO box number. So I'm an AP person. I'm like, oh, okay. They've changed it to, PO box 1234. I go into the DMS and I change it. I never called to verify that that vendor really did change their billing address to a new PO box number. Pick up the phone and call. Any type of vendor changes need to be verified by a second employee or a secondary form of notification. Now, data scraping. This is fascinating to me. Fraudsters typically they scrape to get real data that can make their fake accounts appear authentic. So here's what I'm talking about. So they would extract information online. How excited are you when you buy a new location, you acquire a new dealership, or you're building a brand new dealership, you're building a brand new pre-owned center or a fast lane. So they see and they know because you've put it out on social media, you've put it out in your local newspaper or somehow on the World Wide Web that, oh, we're so excited that we bought this new dealership. That is a target-rich environment. You're adding that information to your DMS, those other vendors that you have no idea whether that vendor did business at that new location. So it really behooves you to make sure that there is a third party, going back to segregation of duties, that there is someone in the dealership that is verifying that your vendors are good, legit vendors at that new dealership or that new acquired acquisition, that those are vendors that they've dealt with in the past. And it's very easy in all the DMS systems. You can run a vendor report. You can run a 12-month history of, have we paid these vendors in the last 12 months? So you can get that right out of your dealer management system. If you don't know how, you can reach out to them and they can build that report for you. It's part of all of their systems. Now, Forbes reported that obtaining a business credit report is less restricted by privacy protections than anything else. So I can go online and I can find a company's EIN number. I can search the Secretary of State's website. So the World Wide Web gives fraudsters all the information that they need. They can set up a fake corporation and then use an actual and real EIN. So if the real company, that real EIN has a good credit rating, a supplier, a fictitious supplier, might extend credit to that entity, but never paid for, and send them goods and services, but it's never been paid for. This is all real. These are all examples that has happened out there. Now, cyber criminals have really begun to utilize that AI craft in well-written, mistake-free emails that are going to fool most everybody. I know in Corpay, we have to take, every 6 months, we have to take training on what the newest, latest, and greatest is out there. So I would suggest that your HR department, if you have an HR person, that maybe they start looking into how can we prevent our employees from becoming victims of these BECs, and put it in your handbook, your employee handbook. Now, as you can see on here, the statistics that Phishing emails still, even right now, these are the most current statistics that I could find for this year. We're still opening 28% of the time. So even all these companies, we know this is a problem. We know phishing emails happen. We've put all the technology in place to try to stop them. Employees are still opening them because they're that good. The fraudsters are that good. And 15% of the time they're replying to the email with that information. And again, this goes back to that trusted employee who really doesn't think that they're doing anything wrong. They are being manipulated into doing that. Now, the third is the unauthorized party. These are the ones that are causing the most havoc. They're intercepting payments, either checks in the mail, like I've talked about, or they're compromising cards. These are your outside influences. So what are the root cause of those? And here's where I'm going to talk to you about the positive pay and positive payee, the differences between the two. So unauthorized transactions, when we're talking about positive pay versus positive payee, positive pay verifies, yes, that it was the right check number, the right dollar amount, but they don't verify who the payee was. Typically, your banks have that. So most of the times dealers, when I'm having these conversations with them, they're like, yes, we have positive pay with our bank. Well, now because they are whitewashing checks, these fraudsters are, now banks have come up with this program called payee positive pay, which means we're verifying that, yes, it was Kai Chevrolet who cashed the check for that dollar amount. Now, there's usually an additional fee for that. The second thing I would like you to take away from my conversation with you today is to make sure that you are signed up for payee positive pay with your finance institution. Even though there might be an extra charge from them, go ahead and sign up for that because that's going to help reduce the chances of that whitewashing of checks. Now, unauthorized transactions can occur when your debit or credit card is lost or stolen. Someone can also steal your identity and use your information to make transactions without your knowledge or consent. So it's not just with the checks, but when they steal your checks, not only can they whitewash it, but now they have your banking information, they have your bank account. I have a dealer group in North Carolina that actually had hundreds of thousands of dollars that was hitting their bank account because they had someone actually steal checks out of the blue post box that was right outside their corporate office. That's where they sent all their checks. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, the mailman would come. Someone stole the checks. They actually stole the whole mailbox. But what they did, instead of whitewashing, they actually stole the bank account and the signature on those checks. And they were able to recreate the checks. And it was a nightmare for that dealer group, absolute nightmare. And they had to close all of their bank accounts, reopen new bank accounts. And you all can imagine, the total cost of fraud when they had to do that. So the bank protected them with saying, hey, these checks are coming through. They're not through on positive pay, but all the hassle, that total cost of fraud that they had to do. Now, ACH and corporate credit card payments, getting those intercepted. I can almost guarantee that there are payments being made on your corporate card or your fuel cards that you are paying and you have absolutely no idea what they are for. You're not getting 100% of the invoices turned into the business office that says, I bought gas, here it is. Chances are you're waiting until the end of the month, and of no fault of yours, of getting those statements, and then you're going through and verifying, yes, $10 here, $10 there. I had a dealer tell me that they had a trusted technician that was putting gas in his car, and they didn't catch it until, and I'm not laughing at the situation, it's just so ridiculous to me that he went on vacation, but the week he was on vacation, he was still putting gas in cars. How did that happen? That's actually how they caught him doing that. So I can guarantee that if you go back 3 to 6 months in your AP vendor payment files for your corporate card charges, you will be missing most of your backup receipts. And I recommend that you do that. You do that, not your AP staff. That you go and you pull your Amex, your Chase card, your Wells Fargo, you go, your fuel card, whatever it is, you as a dealer or the GM, you go and pull those and you flip through and you start questioning those. Those are the unauthorized transactions. Now, USA Today and CBS News back in June of this year said, listen, the post office sent out a statement that said, please stop mailing checks. We're losing them. It's just, it's a crisis right now. And no one is exempt from this. I mean, it could happen to you. You send someone a check for their birthday or a gift card for their birthday. Guess what? Those are getting stolen. You have less than a 25% chance that that payment is actually going to make it. I had a very good dealer friend of mine in Southern Florida. The entire reason that they partnered with Corpay was because of this. They had checks being stolen. They were like, we can't do this anymore. We need somebody to take the risk for us. And then actually the post office not only told people to stop sending checks, but start paying by card, because that seems to be the safest way to make payments. And that's a great transition into how can we reduce and mitigate the risk of payment fraud. The first way is employee training. Don't fall to pressure. Fraudsters instill a sense of urgency to get people to circumvent their normal safety protocols. Remember that phone call that I used at the beginning that said, hey, how soon can you do this? We're going to lose this car. They create that sense of urgency that says, hey, we need this payment right away. So stop. Tell them to trust their gut. If something doesn't seem right, I've never had this person request this, and especially not request it so quickly. Maybe I need to do some digging. And be careful of email. Provide them regular training sessions, as I mentioned, with your HR department to really put that in your employee handbook. You need to keep up on the most recent waves. The second is your vendor data. An estimated 30% of existing vendor data in financial systems is outdated. So you really need to maintain your vendor information, including physical addresses, their mailing addresses, point of contact, phone numbers, extension, and email addresses. Make sure that you have a current and up-to-date W-9 on file every single year. Now, most dealers that I know, I would say 99% of them, have some type of a scanning solution, cold storage, document archiving. So you can store those in cold storage. You don't need to have the paper everywhere in the dealership if you're trying to go paperless, but get those scanned in. Make sure they're in and available, that you've got the most current vendor information for your vendors that you've paid in the last 12 months. Those are your most current vendors. Now, remove those silos. We talked about that. Don't have the same person that's in charge of adding vendors, paying vendors, posting invoices, signing the checks, all of that stuff. Segregate those duties. And then finally, those manual processes. Use purchase orders for every single purchase. They're typically only used in the parts department, but what about those high ticket items like advertising, vehicle purchases? What type of purchase order system are you using? Automated, not a manual, handwritten, but an automated system. Automated controls, such as those that validate bank accounts and ensure the company that is about to get paid is a real and existing supplier, significantly reduces your instance of fraud. So that takes us to why switch to payment automation. That's what Corpay does. We're the #1 business-to-business MasterCard issuer. That's our focus, is on that AP workflow. And fraud prevention, as I mentioned, I have that one dealer that just recently came to me and said, we have to stop this insanity. But 72% of the reason that they're moving, most organizations are moving away from paper checks, is to get rid and reduce their chance of fraud. As I mentioned, it's cost anywhere from $3 to $10. You could Google it, and I think now it's up to even $20, the cost to write a check. So the number one reason or second reason would be to reduce costs. When I talk about gaining visibility, that's the ability to see all those payment methods in one area instead of having all of those segregated. I've got ACH payments hitting my bank account. I've got some payments going through my corporate card. I have other payments being made by check. Looking at it in one area in real time, that's where you can gain visibility. Faster payment methods. And that's where that virtual card comes into play. When you pay a vendor with a virtual credit card, they get the payment immediately. They run the card. They're good. It can't get intercepted, or the chances are, greatly, down to 1% to 2% chance that virtual card could get intercepted, where checks take anywhere from 4 to 14 days, if they even get the check, to be received. And then increase efficiencies is another reason why people move over to payment automation, to increase those efficiencies. No need to run and track down people to sign a check, to stuff it in an envelope, to put it in the mail, run it to the post office. No, there's no need to do that. When it's automated, it's all done right from your computer. You're approving payments, you're sending out the payments. And then what does that mean as far as Corpay goes? So as I mentioned, Corpay, we're a technology company that focuses on business payments. We help organizations optimize the way they make those payments with a focus on accounts payable and corporate expenses. So bringing all of your fuel purchases, all of your corporate purchasing, your P-card, travel and entertainment, and vendor payments under one umbrella, that is Corpay.
Kai?
Yes.
We're getting closer to the top of the hour. If we could enter into the Q&A fairly soon.
Okay, thank you. I'm just about done.
Sure.
So when we talk about a fully managed automation, it really is this simple. It's one throat to choke. You submit the payment file to us via your DMS, and then we take it from there. We pay the vendors, very easy reconciliation, and then that's where we take on the protection for the fraud and that secure vendor data. We have firewalls. The third-party verification I really want to talk to, since I've hit that pretty strong, is we actually go through, when you add a new vendor to your DMS, and with our integration that we have to most of your DMS providers, we're going to verify that that vendor is a legit vendor. So we have one person that enters the vendor in on our side. We go through a very stringent process. And then, by the way, we have a second person that looks at it and says, let's make sure that every I is dotted, every T is crossed. And finally, we have a third specialist that is going to. So before we even pay that vendor the first time, we are making sure that that is a legitimate vendor that is going to be paid through our supplier portal. And of course, vendors or our dealers will tell you that we are the best in class, especially in the dealership world. And when I talk about dealerships, heavy truck, recreational vehicles, marine, car dealers, RV dealers, it's, if it has an engine and wheels, pretty much we're there for you. And as Benjamin Franklin said, if you take care of the pennies, so we're thinking about that $1,400 vendor payment, the dollars will take care of themselves. Thank you so much for your time. And as Doug mentioned, we are ready for questions.
Okay, thanks, Kai. And everyone, you can go ahead and click on the Q&A button for any questions that you would have of Kai or Doug as he's come back on camera too here. But let's begin here. I see, just a moment.
Okay.
I see this one here. How many dealerships are using your solution for vendor payments?
Oh, thank you. Yes, actually, we have over 26 dealer locations. And again, when I say dealer, I'm talking about RV, light speed, or I'm sorry, marine and heavy trucks, about 2,600 dealer locations that use our full AP solution on multiple dealer management systems.
And
It looks like we've got about 2 minutes left here. So if you don't mind, I'm going to just jump in and make another comment. I think one of the simplest things the dealers can do right now is to reduce your vendor base considerably. We know that there are 100 expense categories out there that most dealers use, yet dealers will typically have between 400 and 1,200 suppliers. And just think of that ratio, 4-to-1 or 12-to-1. So reduce that supplier base and you're going to reduce your risk as well, and then move into the Corpay solution. But dealers today have far too many suppliers on their vendor base. Kai, this was very, very helpful, and it's a very real problem. We thank you for your presentation today. I would ask that if any of you folks out there are interested in not currently working with Strategic Source and have a need to attack your expenses, your supply base, we are happy to help. You can reach us at 612-386-3898. Shoot us an email at sales@strategicsource.com, and we're happy to help you. A copy of this webinar will be up on our website at least by tomorrow, if not sooner, and you can access it there. And don't be afraid to reach out to Kai directly for a copy of this deck. I think it'd be very helpful. I know I'm going to do the same thing. And it was very, very informative. The vendor payment space is very important to dealers. But again, I suggest to you that there are just too many vendors out there in most organizations today, and it can be optimized quite a bit. So with that, thank you for joining us today. David, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Doug, and thank you, Kai. Let me bring up the post-session survey. We want to have this on the screen before people depart. We love getting your feedback. You spent an hour with us. We want to see what you thought. So thanks, everyone, for attending today. And we look forward to you joining us on future webinars with Strategic Source. Have a great rest of the week, everyone.